the temperature on the ANC and specifically on South Africa has been dialed up. And it continues to be dialed up with America pulling out of the G20, now also Argentina pulling out of the G20. I think worldwide alliances and coalitions are starting to crumble. More and more countries throughout the world are starting to look inward rather than look outward. You have places like the European Union, for example, that are suffering massive economic blowback. All of this has forced most of the European countries to start looking inward as well. You now have a situation in Europe, for example, where the European Central Bank is starting to renege on their control of the European Union's currency, the euro, and instead allowing every single government in the European zone to basically make their own monetary policy, mainly because you have countries like Germany, countries like Italy, countries like France that have very different needs economically. As this starts to happen, and as places like the European Union and places like America are starting to look more inward, South Africa is increasingly going to find itself on the outs, on the outside of, well, no longer the feeding frenzy that we used to have. For about 30 years now, South Africa has enjoyed pretty much freebies from the rest of the world. If they needed money, they could just always go to the pinata that was America or Europe and say, hey, give us some cash, and they would absolutely shower us with all of this money. But we're starting to see a change happen. We're, for example, starting to see the first countries in both Europe and in Australia maybe changing their minds on the whole green idea, as countries are now finally starting to realize that the more your economy begins to rely on green renewable energy, the more expensive energy actually gets, but also the more unreliable the energy grid becomes. So we're starting to wake up. The world is slowly waking up. Never mind the fact that a very recent study actually confirmed that all of the predictions that has been made by the global warming alarmists for the last 3-4 decades have all been wrong. None of it has actually happened. The sea levels, it turns out they haven't risen at all. And most of the papers that used to say that they did rise, turns out that they were using modeling data rather than actual real world data, because the actual real world data doesn't back up what they're saying. This includes pretty much everything else. As these things are happening, remember, a large part of the money that South Africa was getting for the last maybe half decade was green money. Money to move towards solar power, move towards wind power. And we know that Eskom has just doubled and tripled down on making almost 80% of all of the energy that South Africa generates renewable. This will cause its own problems in due time, and mark my words on this, we will soon have significant problems within our economy. But none of that really matters. None of that is important. What we're talking about today is BEE. And as the world is starting to get smaller, as South Africa is starting to find fewer and fewer allies in the world, BEE has started to become a more and more significant threat for the ANC. People are starting to realize the cracks are starting to show. In my earlier video, and you can go watch that, where I speak about communism in South Africa, and I speak about the fall of communism and why communism doesn't work. If we go back to the Soviet Union and we look, for example, at communism and sort of the last sputtering moments or years of communism in Russia, the same sort of thing that is happening here in South Africa played itself out in Russia as people started to wake up to the reality that this promise, the promise of utopia, just never seems to come any closer. For 30 years now, the ANC has promised that their inclusive policies of economic growth will lead to inclusive economic growth for everyone. We were told that affirmative action will lead to the betterment of everyone's lives. We were told that BEE will lead to a better and more inclusive economy. We were told that employment equity will lead to a better and more inclusive economy. And yet, 27 million South Africans every single night goes to bed having to rely on government handouts because, well, none of these policies have actually translated into anything that is good. As a result of this, the people of South Africa have rightfully started to ask the question, what the hell is the point? Why are you continuing to double down on BEE when all we see as the results of BEE is ANC cadres getting very, very rich? People like Cyril Ramaphosa that have never built a single thing in his entire life, and yet he is a billionaire. Where did that money actually come from? We have now people like Moletsi Mbeki who has started to speak out and say, hold on, Do you guys even know what the history of BEE is? Do you know that it wasn't the ANC that designed and formulated the plan? It was, in fact, Ati Duplessis, a man that worked for Santam or Sanlam at the time. And the idea was never really to uplift the black economic masses. It was only to enrich the state and those connected to the state. That is what most government programs are, and that's what this one was as well. So rightfully, people have started to ask questions. You'll know a couple of weeks ago, the DA was so bold that they came out with a replacement to BE. They said, hey, hold up. We've got a new plan. We're going to call it economic inclusion for all or something to that effect. And it's a better plan. It's definitely a better plan than the BEE because it replaces black economic empowerment with poverty economic empowerment or poor economic empowerment, which is probably what BEE should have been all the time because it closes all of the loops that currently exist within BEE legislation, where a lot of companies where you may have one person who happens to sit on the board of like 20, 30, 40 different companies, or because these companies need black people to sit on the board so that they can do business with the state. But nowhere does it say that they have to have different black people sitting there. So just find like 20 black dudes that are willing to sit on a board and make no noise. And there you go, right? You have your BEE certificate and now you can do business with the state. This is exactly how it's played out. And of course, the DA, sick and tired of this, said, hey, we need a change. There are problems that I have with the DA's bill, but, we'll leave it there. I've already covered that in a separate video, which you can watch on your own time. For now, let's just quickly talk about the ANC's response to the BEE bill from the DA. Initially, the ANC was like, hell to the no. We will stick to BEE because it's the perfect system. And then we started hearing about people in the ANC going, well, actually, it's not that good, right? And then the ANC once again doubled down and said, the DA should go sleep with the fishes. We're all for the transformation of the economy. And then other people said, hey, there's some people in the ANC going, well, actually, this might not be better for the economy. So we've heard a bunch of different things from the ANC. Of course, publicly, the ANC has always maintained this policy that they and they alone can come up with the ideas that fix the country. And even if someone comes up with a great idea to fix the country, the ANC will deny that that is a good idea. They'll sort of make it off as like, these guys are just racist. And then eventually they might adopt the policy, dependent on, of course, what the policy is. I mean, how long have we had e-tolls and they're still kicking around, even though everyone knows they don't really work. So, fundamentally, the ANC is one of those parties that, and this isn't really just the ANC, this is an ideological thing, right? If laws are passed on an ideological basis, it's almost impossible to turn them around, even if there's evidence that they don't work. Because, well, you'd have to admit that your entire ideology is flawed, and people like their ideologies. People are married to it. That's why you still have communists today, in spite of the fact that hundreds of millions of bodies underlie the failures of communism. They're still there because, well, it's ideologically just sound. But anyway, so the ANC comes out and they say, hey, we might be open to looking at it. But of course, they don't just say that. Paul Mashatile does add, to the extent that there may be weaknesses, let's correct that. Let's make amendments. That is why there is this review. There is no need to ditch the legislation. Something that is quite big about this, and yes, the ANC is now putting BE under review to try and see if there are ways to actually close some of the loopholes that exist within BE legislation. But something that needs to be mentioned here that makes this kind of significant is the fact that the ANC has never responded like this to BE legislation or challenges to it. Pretty much every single time the ANC has just said, go screw yourself and just continue to be. So this is a big deal. Make no mistake. It is a big deal. But it's not as big of a deal as the media wants to make it out. Everyone in the media is currently writing about, they're changing it. It's going to be so much better. No, it's not going to be so much better. In fact, it's probably not going to be better at all. How do I know it's not going to be better at all? Because the ANC is an ideological beast. They live and breathe their ideology. They are communists to the core. The idea that they would renege on a policy that is so profitable to them. The idea that they would close the loopholes that allow for their cadres to get super rich at the hands of the taxpayers. That just won't stand. So even if the ANC were to put BEE through a review process, guaranteed at the end of that review process, there will be enough changes so that the people of South Africa think that this is an actual change to BEE, but they will almost certainly open new loopholes. This is just how the ANC operates. There must always be new loopholes because remember, Cyril Ramaphosa himself was a benefactor of BEE. The man has built nothing. He is the king of nothing, and yet he is a billionaire. A more undeserving and unaccomplished, and I don't even know what the words are that I'm trying to use here, but a more insignificant man you would struggle to find. Right? And yet he has managed to become one of the richest men in South Africa. Why? B, baby. So there's no way that Cyril Ramaphosa is going to sort of reverse that. Because if he does, the other people in government, the ones who have not yet made their billions, they will immediately accuse Cyril Ramaphosa and the other millionaires and billionaires within government to sort of pull up the ladder from up behind them, right? And that will just cause divisions within the ANC, like unlike anything you've ever seen. So yeah, I think people shouldn't hold their breath. The ANC has surrendered, and I think for now, it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on what that surrender looks like. But I wouldn't hold my breath into thinking that the ANC is interested in any sort of real reforms on this. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you like my content and you think more people should be watching it, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and smash the bell, because it helps, and it is free. Massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons as well as the YouTube channel members for continuing to support this channel. To become a YouTube member, just the join button right below this video or Patreon, link in the description down below. As always, see you guys in the next one. Peace.